Rain slicked the asphalt like liquid glass, reflecting the streetlights in sharp shards. I was halfway through sliding the gate closed at the entrance to Silverpine Lake when the scream cut through the air, a jagged, urgent sound that made me freeze mid-motion. My hand hovered over the latch. I recognized that voice instantly, Karen Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, wielding entitlement like a weapon. "What do you think you're doing?" she bellowed, striding toward me in her heels, rainwater splashing around her ankles. Her umbrella flipped inside out, a pathetic defiance against the storm. Behind her, 3 SUVs idled impatiently, headlights sweeping over the gravel like predators hunting prey. I exhaled slowly, deliberately, letting my calm anchor the chaos. "Closing the gate," I said evenly. "Private property. Only members may enter." Karen's face twisted, red streaks across her pale skin, mascara running like war paint. "I have rights. I can bring whoever I want here. This is not your decision." The tension was immediate, personal, and raw. The kind that makes your teeth ache and your stomach knot before the first punch is thrown. She flailed toward the gate, but I held my ground. Years of dealing with people like her had taught me that composure is armor. As the SUVs rolled closer, the first real threat appeared, not Karen, but the strangers she was bringing. Men in hooded jackets, their faces half hidden, their eyes sharp, observant. Something about them didn't belong in a peaceful suburban community. My mind catalogued possible intruders, possible escalation, potential witnesses. The normal life of Silverpine Lake, a quiet community of weekend anglers and retirees, suddenly felt fragile, almost unreal. I had lived here for years, managing access to the private fishing grounds with strict but fair rules. Routine inspections, careful guest logs, respectful reminders, that was my life. Until tonight. Karen jabbed a finger at me. "I am a member. I pay my dues. I have rights. You cannot lock me out." "Rules apply to everyone," I said. The rain had picked up, hammering the metal gate. Lightning forked overhead, a silent cinematic drumbeat. My heartbeat matched it. The SUVs stopped short, men spilling out, their boots crunching gravel. The quiet threat became tangible. I noticed small details. One of them carried a black case, the kind used for fishing rods, or something else. Another glanced around like he expected trouble. Karen, oblivious to her own danger, turned her anger outward at me, but the real threat was shifting subtly behind her. My instincts screamed, "This is no ordinary HOA confrontation." I stepped closer to the gate, my hand gripping the wet metal, making a deliberate show of control. "I can't let anyone in without authorization. You'll need to leave or call the board." Her lips curled, a sneer. "You'll regret this. You're not the law." I didn't respond, because she wasn't the danger. The men behind her were watching, calculating, testing boundaries. I noticed the smallest thing, a hand twitch near the black case, and I understood, this could get violent quickly if I wasn't careful. Karen lunged forward, her umbrella swinging. I sidestepped, letting the metal pole clang against the gate. Sparks of metal and tension lit the air. One of her SUVs honked sharply, a warning. But I didn't budge. My eyes flicked between Karen and the strangers, registering patterns, noting weaknesses, mentally preparing the next move. "Why are you doing this?" she shrieked. Her voice, usually sharp and domineering, now had a tremor, the first crack in her armor. "Protecting the lake," I said simply. My tone was calm but firm. "You wouldn't understand. You only see what you want." The rain slowed for a moment, a brief lull in the storm, and in that instant I saw the first hint of something much larger, a logo on one of the men's jackets. A corporate emblem, sleek, modern, out of place in Silverpine. That detail froze me, and yet I forced myself to stay in the moment. One confrontation at a time. Karen's fury escalated, bordering on hysteria, but the men remained unnervingly composed. Their presence was a silent warning, a puzzle I hadn't solved yet. I had handled aggressive HOA members before, but this felt orchestrated, deliberate, far beyond a simple territorial dispute. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the lake in the distance, glimmering behind the gate I controlled. For the first time, I realized the stakes were higher than petty arguments, trespassers, potential danger, and a mystery lurking beneath the surface of suburban civility. Karen screamed once more, a piercing sound that sliced through the tension. I finally spoke, my voice steady, carrying over the storm. "Leave. Now. Or I call the authorities." The strangers exchanged glances, silent communication, and Karen froze mid-shout. The first cracks in her confidence appeared as they stepped back slightly, a ripple of hesitation. My heart still raced, but the immediate danger was contained, for now. Yet I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The gate was closed, the threat momentarily held at bay, but something larger had entered Silverpine Lake tonight. And I had just locked it inside. Morning arrived in muted gray, draping Silverpine Lake in a cold, hesitant light. The rain had stopped, but puddles lingered like glass mirrors reflecting the uneasy calm. I walked along the edge of the gated lake, notebook in hand, jotting details from the previous night: SUV makes, the logo on their jackets, Karen's irrational rage, the black case. Something about it all screamed intentional, not random. I retraced every movement, every word, every glance. Subtle clues revealed themselves. The footprints in the mud were heavier than ordinary boots, evenly spaced, practiced. The tires left deep grooves, tire treads I could identify as belonging to high-end corporate SUVs, not typical suburban vehicles. I went home and pulled up the HOA records on my laptop, scrolling through membership logs and guest authorizations. Karen's record was spotless, yet her claim to rights was nonsensical. No board meeting had approved her guest list for last night. But that wasn't the real puzzle. Something about her fury, her overconfidence, hinted at manipulation from someone else. She wasn't acting alone. I grabbed my phone and called an old friend, Riley, who had worked in security consulting. "Something's off at Silverpine," I said as soon as he answered. "People came last night, 3 men, professional looking, corporate insignia." Karen lost her mind, but they weren't ordinary guests. Riley's voice was calm but sharp. "Stay observant. You might be dealing with something larger than petty HOA drama. Send me photos of the gate, the footprints, anything unusual." I clicked pictures, careful not to draw attention, then went back to the lake. The men weren't there now, but the black case from last night was gone too. Almost as if it had vanished into thin air. My pulse quickened. The disappearance felt deliberate, orchestrated. The investigation became methodical. I interviewed other residents subtly, asking about strangers, strange cars, odd deliveries. Nobody had noticed anything unusual, which made me uneasy. Either they were extremely cautious or deliberately silent. A quiet trap was forming, layers of secrecy wrapped around a small, seemingly peaceful community. Late afternoon, I spotted movement near the far dock. A shadow ducked behind trees, fleeting but deliberate. I approached slowly, eyes scanning, senses heightened. Whoever it was had surveillance-level awareness. My instincts told me they were watching me as much as I was watching them. I crouched behind a tree and recorded with my phone. The figure paused, and in the split second of visibility, I saw the corporate emblem again. My chest tightened. This was no casual intrusion, this was coordinated, planned, strategic. Whoever had sent them had resources, intelligence, and intentions beyond simple harassment. Back at home, I spread all the evidence across my kitchen table: photos, notes, HOA logs. Something clicked. The black case, the corporate logo, Karen's irrational rage, they were connected. I cross-referenced local businesses with that logo and discovered a shell company, registered in the next county over, no public employees listed, just a P.O. box. Quiet. Invisible. Perfect for hiding agendas. I made another call, this time to a private investigator I'd hired years ago for unrelated issues. "You're going to want to see this," I said, sending him the files. "We might be dealing with something bigger than a neighborhood dispute." By evening, I felt the first real pulse of danger. Shadows lengthened around my property, every rustle in the trees setting my nerves on edge. I wasn't paranoid, I was precise. I reviewed security camera footage from the lake entrance. One of the SUVs had returned for mere seconds, a single flash in the footage, before disappearing again. Whoever was behind this was testing, measuring, gauging reactions. I realized I needed a plan. I couldn't just wait. Every careful movement, every small investigation was a piece of the puzzle. Quiet traps were already in place, but I could turn them into opportunities. A note slipped under Karen's door, subtle queries to the HOA board, discreet monitoring of the lake. Intelligence gathering wasn't just strategic, it was survival. Night fell, and I set up a temporary observation point at the far end of the lake, behind thick brush. Binoculars in hand, I scanned for movement. The water shimmered, serene, a deceptive calm. And then I saw it, a ripple, subtle but deliberate. Someone was swimming across the lake, not for leisure, but with purpose. My breath caught. Whoever it was, they knew the lake as intimately as I did, moving in silence, calculating each stroke. I stayed hidden, letting them pass, recording every detail. When they disappeared behind the trees on the opposite bank, a shiver ran down my spine. They were professionals, confident, and precise. And the message was clear, this wasn't a one-off confrontation. They were probing, testing boundaries, measuring defenses. I returned home, exhausted but awake in ways that didn't depend on sleep. Every piece of evidence, every observation, pointed to an intricate, hidden threat. Silverpine Lake wasn't just a peaceful community, it had become a chessboard. And I had just realized I was playing against an opponent who thought 10 moves ahead. By the time I shut my laptop, I knew the stakes. Karen's rage had been the spark, the strangers the ignition, but the fire was larger than I could see. Someone powerful had set this in motion, and their intentions were murky at best, deadly at worst. As I locked my door, the faintest creak echoed outside, a reminder that observation was mutual. The threat wasn't gone, it was waiting, watching, calculating. And I had no illusions. To protect Silverpine Lake, I had to uncover the conspiracy before it struck fully. The morning of the HOA annual meeting arrived like a storm waiting to break. Inside the Silverpine clubhouse, polished wood gleamed under fluorescent lights, but the atmosphere was electric, tense, a low hum of whispered anticipation. I arrived early, folder in hand, evidence meticulously organized, photos, screenshots, and my notes detailing the previous night's events. Tonight, everything had to be exposed, calmly, strategically, publicly. Karen was already there, perched at the head of the room like a self-appointed monarch, her heels tapping, eyes scanning for any sign of dissent. She had no idea her theatrics had been infiltrated by far more than mere HOA disagreements. She still believed the fight was personal. I knew better. I took a seat near the back, keeping my cool, observing everyone. The room slowly filled with residents, neighbors chatting in cautious, polite tones. Some smiled at me, unaware of the storm I had documented. Some avoided eye contact, subtle indicators of either fear or loyalty to Karen. The first agenda items were mundane, maintenance reports, budget approvals. The room's calm was deceptive, a slow burn before the explosion. I waited for the right moment, timing was everything. Karen finally stood, voice loud, theatrical. And now, regarding lake access, she announced, scanning the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. I believe we have the right to bring guests. I interrupted softly, standing with my folder in hand. Actually, the rules are clear, and the evidence is here. I laid the folder on the podium, opened it, and began displaying photos of last week's SUVs, the black case, and the men moving near the lake at night. A collective murmur ran through the room. Karen's face flushed red, disbelief freezing her mid-sentence. That's not, these aren't. Look closely, I said, my tone calm but firm. These men were here without permission, following your orders, yes, but directed by someone else. Someone with resources far beyond Silverpine's boundaries. I clicked my phone, projecting images on the wall. The corporate logo appeared larger than life. Phones emerged from pockets. Eyes widened. Gasps whispered through the room. Karen's hand shook as she gripped the podium. The mask of control was cracking. I tracked the company, I continued. A shell operation, invisible, designed to bypass oversight, monitor residents, and intimidate anyone who enforces the rules. This wasn't about guests or rights, it was about testing how far they could push. Karen spluttered, but no one supported her. The room had shifted. The narrative of petty HOA conflict was gone. Now, fear, understanding, and outrage replaced it. Suddenly, a door slammed at the back. The three men from the previous night entered, casual, confident, carrying briefcases, a visible assertion of control. Residents froze, some gasped audibly. Karen's mouth fell open, terror overtaking anger. I stayed calm, keeping my stance measured. "You're not welcome here," I said, my voice carrying the weight of law and reason. "Leave now, or authorities are involved." One of them smiled, a cold, precise gesture. "We're just here to observe," he said smoothly, opening his briefcase. Inside, high-tech recording devices, surveillance equipment. The room erupted into murmurs. Their intention was clear, intimidation, but they had miscalculated the audience and the exposure. Karen tried to intervene, desperate. "Stop. You can't. This is my meeting." But no one listened. The residents had seen the evidence. The truth was public. I took a step forward, showing the images, explaining the patterns. This isn't about personal disputes anymore. This is about intrusion, manipulation, and hidden power. And now it's in the open. The men tried to respond, but the room's atmosphere had shifted. The power they relied on, fear, secrecy, was gone. One of them lunged subtly, attempting to intimidate Karen, but I stepped in front, blocking the movement. My calm precision contrasted with their frantic aggression. A sudden commotion, one resident pressed a panic button under the table, a precaution from past HOA security upgrades. Lights flickered, alarms buzzed. The intruders froze, realizing their careful surveillance was compromised. In a matter of seconds, the tables had turned. Karen's expression collapsed. Her confidence had been a veneer, shredded under the weight of public scrutiny and professional intervention. Tears welled, frustration and helplessness mixing. She was unraveling in real time, exposed alongside the larger threat she had unknowingly empowered. I moved to the front, turning the evidence toward everyone. This is why vigilance matters. Rules are not arbitrary. Enforcement isn't personal, it's about safety, integrity, and accountability. One of the men dropped a device in panic, a loud click echoing in the room. Others exchanged glances, calculated but faltering. I could see the unraveling, control slipping. The moment was precise, explosive, and public. Authorities arrived minutes later, called by discreet observers. The intruders were apprehended, the evidence seized. The residents, initially shocked, started murmuring support, relief, and whispered gratitude. The power of secrecy had been broken. Karen slumped into her chair, defeated. She avoided my gaze, aware that her ego and misplaced authority had fueled a dangerous escalation. Yet the larger picture remained. Whoever had orchestrated this from afar was still out there, silent but observant. I stepped outside, breathing deeply. Rain had returned, soft, cleansing, as if Silverpine Lake itself had exhaled after the storm. The confrontation had been public, the evidence undeniable, and the immediate threat neutralized, but the chessboard extended beyond the horizon. As I watched the residents disperse, I noticed something, a single black car, parked at the edge of the lake, engine running. No one inside. A subtle reminder, the enemy wasn't defeated. They were patient, precise, and persistent. And for the first time, I understood fully, the battle wasn't over. Silverpine Lake was safe for now, but the quiet, lurking menace had only retreated, waiting for the next move. Dawn broke over Silverpine Lake like a fragile promise. The mist curled over the water, softening the edges of docks and reeds, turning the familiar landscape into something almost dreamlike. After the chaos of last night, the community moved cautiously, silently, as if everyone were testing the air for lingering danger. I walked along the lake's edge, boots leaving small impressions in damp soil, thinking through every detail of the previous evening. Karen had retreated into her home, humiliated but unharmed. The intruders had been taken away by authorities, but the knowledge that they had a bigger operation behind them made me uneasy. The fight had been won, but the war felt far from over. Neighbors emerged slowly, tentative greetings replacing the usual casual chatter. Some offered nods of gratitude, others hung back, unsure if their peace had truly returned. I stopped by the main dock, where a small group of residents had gathered, holding coffee cups and sharing hushed conversations. Their faces bore the weight of yesterday's revelation, disbelief, relief, and a quiet vigilance. "Thank you," whispered Mrs. Langley, a retired teacher who had watched the entire confrontation from her balcony. "You saved us, all of us." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "We all contributed. Awareness matters." The words felt heavy with truth. It wasn't just my fight, it was everyone's responsibility to guard against hidden threats. Karen, meanwhile, remained absent from the public eye, her ego shattered but her influence lingering like a faint shadow over the community. I didn't pity her, her arrogance had brought danger to Silverpine, but I did note the lesson her downfall imparted: power wielded recklessly, without foresight, can amplify threats instead of containing them. I returned home, sifting through my notes once more. The intruder's equipment, seized by the authorities, had offered hints: surveillance grids, tracking devices, encrypted communications. Whoever orchestrated this from afar had deep pockets, careful planning, and patience. The shell company was likely just one node in a larger network, a spiderweb designed to infiltrate and destabilize communities quietly. Despite the threat, a fragile calm began to settle. The lake was open to its rightful residents, the gate functioning as intended. Children laughed in the distance, unaware of the chaos that had unfolded, their innocence a sharp contrast to the calculated menace we had faced. Nature seemed to reclaim its balance, if only for a moment. But in the quiet, I noticed subtle signs that all was not entirely well. A single, unusual footprint along the mud near the dock, a size and tread pattern I didn't recognize. No one had been there overnight. The rain had washed most evidence away, yet this remained, deliberate and conspicuous, like a signature left by someone confident they were unnoticed. I exhaled slowly, a shiver running down my spine. The message was clear: they had not given up. The intruders had been caught, yes, but the orchestrator, the mind behind the coordinated intimidation, remained invisible. Somewhere beyond Silverpine Lake, a patient, calculating figure was observing, waiting for the right moment to strike again. I prepared a small briefing for the HOA board, summarizing what had happened, the evidence collected, and the security measures that would need to be enhanced. I didn't sugarcoat it: the community needed vigilance, protocols, and unity. Fear would not protect them, intelligence would. By mid-afternoon, life began to resume its normal rhythm. Boats glided across the water, fishing lines dipped into the calm lake, and neighbors exchanged cautious smiles. The immediate danger had passed, but the lesson lingered: peace was fragile, and safety required constant awareness. I returned to my home office, reviewing maps of the surrounding area, noting strategic points, camera placements, and potential vulnerabilities. Even in a peaceful suburban community, strategy was essential. I traced the patterns of the intruders' movements, their timing, and the logistical footprint of the shell company. The complexity was staggering, yet necessary to understand. Night fell again, soft and silent. I stepped onto my porch, looking across the lake. The water reflected the moonlight in fractured patterns, shimmering as if alive. And then I saw it, a single flicker of light at the far edge, subtle but unmistakable. No vehicle, no visible human figure, just a flash of movement. My stomach tightened. The enemy hadn't gone. They were still there, watching, patient, invisible, and infinitely meticulous. They would return when they deemed the moment right, testing boundaries, probing weaknesses. Silverpine Lake had been spared this time, but the game was far from over. I let the chill settle over me, a reminder that vigilance never ends. The community was safe for now, yet the silent enemy loomed, just beyond sight, waiting. And in that waiting, the threat was no less real, no less deadly. I closed the blinds, shutting out the faint shimmer across the lake, but the awareness remained, a pulse beneath the calm. The battle had been won, the immediate danger neutralized, but the shadow of the greater threat lingered like a dark tide on the horizon. And somewhere, beyond the edges of Silverpine Lake, someone smiled, confident that the next move was theirs.